Most of the world's best wrestlers are signed up to a contract, as all the top wrestling promotions know just how valuable they are. This is why you're unlikely to see Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns not getting offered big money by WWE to re-up when the time comes, AEW not bending over backwards to keep Will Ospreay and Swerve Strickland on their roster. But what of those who are free agents currently, the few who can still pick and choose where they want to go? Well, it's those wrestlers we're going to be looking at right now, starting with the king of the indies, Matt Cardona. Yes, of all the free agents out there today, possibly the biggest and best of them all has to be Matt Cardona. And that's because over the last half-decade, he's been able to turn himself into a star despite not working full-time in any big promotion. No, while he has made the odd one-off appearance for AEW, the man formerly known as Zack Ryder has never signed a contract there, and this has allowed him to be something of a wanderer, going from place to place and doing as he chooses. What kinds of places has he been going other than Jacksonville? Well, Game Changer Wrestling would be one of the main ones, with this being the place he rebranded himself as a deathmatch king for a while when he beat Nick Gage to become the GCW World Champion in July of 2021. But that's not the only place Cardona has been plying his craft since he left WWE behind in 2020. No, he's also been showing up in companies such as Major League Wrestling, Billy Corgan's National Wrestling Alliance, and TNA, finding varying levels of success in each of these. Yes, at this point, there's no bigger name out there than Matt Cardona on the American Indies, and that's given him a lot of power to show up all over the country and do his thing. The only question left then is, will he ever sign on the dotted line with a major company again? We certainly hope so, and the place he's most likely to land in is WWE, as it's here that his wife Chelsea Green wrestles. Until that happens, however, the king of the indies will remain just that, the biggest fish in a small pond, helping to raise up all the companies he works for. And he's not the only person who's been hitting the indie circuit post-WWE run, as the same thing could be said about our next subject, Matt Riddle. Now, Matt Riddle should be a name familiar to any fans who were watching during the late 2010s and early 2020s, as this was when he was working there as a popular mid-card act, first as part of the NXT roster where he memorably teamed up with Pete Dunne. Once that run came to an end, however, it would be on to the main roster for a while, where he once more formed a notable odd couple double act, this time with Randy Orton. But while it might have felt like this was going to lead to bigger and better things for him down the line, the Allentown native would end up being released in 2023, forcing him to go in search of work on the indie circuit. And this was something he did by showing up for places like Major League Wrestling and TNA over the months and years following. Hell, at one point he'd even do a few shots for New Japan Strong, with this setting up an eventual match with Hiroshi Tanahashi, where he briefly became NJPW World Television Champion. That said, none of this would lead to Riddle signing a contract with the #1 company out east. No, as of the time of this video's recording, he remains a free agent, with WWE seemingly not being in a hurry to bring him back, and AEW not even taking a look at him yet. Does this mean he's destined to go unsigned for the rest of his career? Probably not. No, Matt Riddle will probably find himself signing somewhere again before all is said and done. Until then, though, he'll have to continue working in indies, all while occasionally doing shots over in Japan if the offers continue to come his way there. But then, it's not like this is a bad place for him to be, as the independents are still a great place to make a living for a pro wrestler. So all is not lost if you find yourself there for an extended period of time. And this is something our next subject is currently learning, someone who goes by the name of Indi Hartwell. Of course, prior to 2024, Indi Hartwell was very much not a free agent. No, at this point, she was under contract to WWE, and it was there that, mostly in NXT, she made a splash as part of The Way during both the dying days of the Black and Gold era and the early days of the 2.0 era. So much success would she have in the developmental brand, in fact, she'd at one point become NXT Women's Champion for a brief time. Unfortunately though, once she was called up to the main roster in 2023, things started to go off the rails for the Australian, as she found herself pretty directionless. And this all led to her being cut from her contract in October of the following year. What has she done since then? Well, not letting her release get her down, Indi Hartwell has continued to work on the indies, primarily over in her home country for places like Renegades of Wrestling, as visa issues have made it easier for her to ply her craft there. But that's not to say she's been stuck in the land down under. No, pretty recently the former NXT star made it back to the US for long enough to wrestle for House of Glory in New York, where she went one-on-one with Mercedes Moné. Does this give her an in for a job with AEW in the near future? Possibly. And who knows? If that doesn't happen, maybe WWE will decide they want her back on their roster too. Or maybe she'll end up with neither and will just continue to do her thing on the independents instead, becoming a female version of Matt Cardona, a wanderer who goes from place to place, wrestling the people that she comes across in each stop. Yes, in years to come, we could be looking back on this period of Indi's career and thinking of it as the best thing that could have happened to her, as it allowed her to gain experience, much like others have done in the past, like Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre. But let's move away from Indi Hartwell for a moment and on to another set of female free agents out there currently, the twin duo known as the Bellas. That's right, while they're best known for their runs with WWE during the PG era, where they were one of the most heavily focused upon acts in the company's Divas division at the time, Nikki and Brie Bella actually left WWE behind in early 2023 when their contracts expired and they chose not to re-sign new ones. Why had they done this? Well, they felt they could be better served focusing on their own business empire, with this leading to them starting to go by their real names of the Garcia twins. Of course, unlike other people we've looked at today then, the business empire they have has meant Nikki and Brie have not been forced to grind away on the indie circuit post-WWE run. Sure, Nikki did make a brief return to WWE as a surprise entrant in the 2025 Women's Royal Rumble, so there obviously is still some desire for her to wrestle. But with her as of yet not signing a new contract with World Wrestling Entertainment, we're not entirely convinced this is something she has ambitions of doing much more going forward. No, more than likely if she does wrestle again in the future, it'll be more one-shot appearances, something that doesn't require her to sign a new contract with any one particular place. And as for Brie Bella, well, if she ever decided to make an in-ring return, we see her situation being similar. But then, unlike Nikki, it's not like Brie has shown any desire to return to the ring yet. So it might just be that she's done for good at this point and is happy to carry on with her new career as an entrepreneur. Whatever happens, we imagine the result will be the same in that the Bella twins, or Garcia twins as they're now known, will remain free agents in the wrestling world going forward. And they're not the only female tag team who are currently in this situation. No, moving back to Australian performers for a second, there's also our next subjects, the Iconics. Yes, Australia has been quietly killing it in recent years when it comes to developing top-level talent. After all, this is the country that has given us superstars like Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm, and Bronson Reed, just to name a few. But one pair of Aussie wrestlers which have gone somewhat forgotten in all of this had been the one made up of the pair formerly known as Billie Kay and Peyton Royce. Why is this? Well, despite getting over during the latter days of WWE's PG era as the Iconics, a tag team who went as far as to at one point win the women's tag team titles at WrestleMania 35, come late 2019, they'd be split up. And this pretty much stopped any momentum they'd been building up stone dead, leading to both being cut from their contracts in April of 2021. Where would they go from here? Well, deciding that they were stronger as a duo, the real-life best friends would remain together as they headed over to TNA for a while, there rebranding themselves as Jesse and Cassie, the Inspiration. Needless to say then, it didn't take long for the Inspiration to find success in TNA. Hell, in their first in-ring appearance for the Toronto-based company, they'd defeat Decay to win the Impact Knockouts Tag Team Championships. Once that run was over though, it would be a case of exiting stage right for Cassie and Jesse. And the reason for this was because they would both effectively decide to stop as full-time wrestlers here. Why had they decided to hang up their boots? Well, at that point, both Iconics would start families of their own. But this might not be the end of the story for the duo, because as recently as 2023, Cassie had been dipping her toes in the water of wrestling again, suggesting she might be considering coming out of retirement fully at some point. And if she does that, you could bet Jesse will be following her. The only question is, will they return to a big promotion at that point? But what of someone who recently came out of AEW instead of WWE? How have they fared as a free agent? Well, let's find out by looking at our next subject, Jake Hager. Yes, he might have first rose to prominence in WWE as Jack Swagger, one-time Mr. Money in the Bank and one-time World Heavyweight Champion, but in recent years the Fargo native has been even better known for his spell in All Elite Wrestling, where he played the role of lackey to Chris Jericho, both as part of the Inner Circle and a part of the Jericho Appreciation Society. That said, ever since his contract ran out in May of 2024 and AEW chose not to re-sign him, he's been a free agent. Not that this has been a bad thing for him though, as Hagar has always had a second career to fall back on, that of an MMA fighter. Yes, as someone who's had 4 professional fights with Bellator in the past, he's built up a reputation for himself as someone who can certainly go in the octagon. Sure, he might not have fought again since his time with AEW came to an end, but that could change any time, as now that he doesn't have wrestling to focus on anymore, he can devote all of his energies to mixed martial arts. Or who knows, maybe this isn't something he wants to do anymore and instead wanted to get back into pro wrestling at some point. It certainly wouldn't be hard for someone with his level of fame and talent to work in the indies if he wanted to do this. The only question is, would that be enough for the big man, or would he rather make a comeback to WWE again after all these years? Yes, it's entirely possible we see Jack Swagger return before long and pick up right where he left off in 2017 as a reliable mid-card act. One person we might have to wait a little longer to see in WWE again though is our next subject, another recent AEW alumni who goes by the name of Parker Boudreaux. That's right, it's easy to forget now, but for a brief period in 2023, Parker Boudreaux was an on-screen character for All Elite Wrestling. Hell, at one point, he was even part of the Mogul Affiliates, the original version of Swerve Strickland's Mogul Embassy that he had before he aligned himself with the Martin Prince to his Nelson Muntz Prince Nana. And the reason this has gone so forgotten today is because it was such a short run, with it effectively being over once the Florida native got injured in June of that year. But then short runs were nothing new to Boudreaux by then, as prior to that, he'd had another brief spell in a major North American company, this time with WWE, as it was between 2021 and 2022 that he worked there on the NXT roster under the name of Harlan. Sadly though, despite Paul Heyman himself at one point declaring Harlan to be the next big thing in wrestling, it wouldn't work out that way. And this is how he's found himself a free agent today. But then it's not like Boudreaux's been doing nothing since leaving both WWE and AEW. No, in the last year he's shown up both in Japan and Mexico, so he's certainly been keeping busy, and he's been looking great in those places so far, far better than he ever was in either WWE or AEW. So maybe the best thing for his future is to remain at this level then, as if he continues to work for AAA, he'll be working for one of the top 2 companies in all of Mexico. Of course, not every free agent is going to want to start a new career in Mexico or Japan, though. No, some feel tailor-made for an eventual WWE return instead, and that's certainly the case with our next subject, Rick Boogs. That's right, for a while there, back during the early 2020s, it felt like Rick Boogs was set to break out as a star in WWE. And the reason we say this is because he was starting to get over with fans on account of his 80s rock star style persona. But while fans were happy, someone in WWE management obviously wasn't happy enough with the man from Wisconsin. And that's why he'd be released in September of 2023, with this bringing an end to the time of Rick Boogs in WWE. What has he done since then? Well, not a lot in terms of wrestling. No, according to a recent interview with Chris Van Vliet, Boogs decided early on that WWE was the only place for him, and that if he couldn't wrestle there, he didn't want to wrestle anywhere. So this means unless he changes his mind, he's going to have to wait for WWE to give him another call one day and ask him to come back. Will this happen? We hope so, as his character was really starting to get over at one point, and he certainly had a lot of potential. So we expect a return there before all is said and done. Really, it may just be a case of who will go back first at this point, Rick Boogs, or our next subject, No Way Jose. Don't remember No Way Jose? Well, he was never a hugely focused upon act during his time in WWE between 2015 and 2020. No, back then he was very much slotted into the comedy undercard role, with most of his appeal being that he would lead a conga line out to the ring at various points. That said, this was enough to see him gain some cult status down in NXT for a while, and it was enough to even see him get a main roster call-up in 2018. The only problem was that main roster run would end once he was cut from his contract in April of 2020. Yes, it wasn't an ideal situation for Jose, as all of a sudden he found himself without a job, and this meant he'd have to venture out into the indie circuit to try and make a living during a time when there wasn't a lot of indie wrestling going on. But at least things worked out for him in the end, as later on that same year, he'd be able to get a job with TNA, with him there basically playing the same character as he had in WWE, albeit this time under the legally distinct name of No Way. Would this lead to a big-time career renaissance for the conga line leader? Unfortunately not, as by the time November of 2021 came around, Jose would have parted ways with Impact too. And since then, it's been indies like Defy in Washington or WBE in Florida that he's been forced to ply his craft in. But like Rick Boogs, we can eventually see him getting a second chance in WWE. Or maybe he doesn't. That's right. As we've already shown with people like Matt Cardona, in 2025 you don't have to work for a large promotion in order to make a living as a wrestler. No, you can get by being an indie darling who travels all over the place, and in some cases, like that of Cardona's, this can lead to someone gaining even more notoriety than they would have in any big league. So maybe No Way Jose remains an indie guy in the future, someone not concerned with signing a big money contract. And maybe this allows him to flourish in a way he wouldn't have otherwise. Anything can happen in this current era of wrestling we live in. After all, in only a few short years, our next subject went from being a sommelier on the main roster in WWE to a superhero-esque figure down in NXT to a free agent working their way back up on the indie circuit. Who are we talking about here? Why, Scripps, of course. Of course, back when he was working on SmackDown as an underling of Carmella, Scripps was going by the name of Reggie, and it was here that he'd show us some of his athletic skills too. After that was done though, following a brief run as 24/7 champion, he'd be moved down to NXT and rebranded as a superhero of sorts. Sure, the costume may have left a lot to be desired, and the character wasn't exactly great, but at least it gave the Memphis native an opportunity to rebuild himself on a smaller brand. And while this appeared to be something he was making some degree of progress with for a while, eventually he'd be dropped from that brand too when his contract expired in June of 2024 and was not renewed. Where would he go from there then? Well, over to the indie circuit. That's right, since the summer of last year, the man now going by the name of Sidney Akeem has been appearing for places like Game Changer Wrestling, the same place Matt Cardona has spent much of his time since leaving WWE. Yes, Akeem seems to now be a fixture on the indie circuit, whether he's working in GCW or any of the other independents out there he's appeared at in the last year. We're talking about places like Demand Lucha in Toronto, World Series Wrestling in Australia, or Atomic Legacy Wrestling in Orlando. And the longer he continues to do this, the more he's going to be able to build up a name for himself as someone who deserves a second bite at the apple on a nationwide televised product. But he is not the only person who was released by WWE in 24 who's looking for that second bite at the apple, as our next subject is currently hoping for the same thing to happen to him. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but Boa? Now, Boa might not be a name that jumps out to everyone, even if you are a current day fan, and that's because he was never a main roster fixture during his time there between 2016 and 2024. No, back then he was a developmental player, someone who had first gotten signed after getting noticed during a tryout session in his native China. Obviously then this quickly saw him be sent over stateside to the WWE Performance Center, and then from there on to NXT, where he was trained in the ways of the WWE style. But while things seemed to be slowly moving upward for him after making it to 2.0 in 2020, he never managed to break out in a way which saw him be seriously considered for a call-up. No, after spending a period as a lackey to Mei Ying, Boa would find himself being cut from his contract in May of 2024, with this bringing an all too abrupt end to his time in NXT. Would he be able to recover after the fact? Well, that's still a work in progress, as since leaving WWE behind, the Beijing native hasn't been able to do any work in North America, possibly because he no longer has a work visa allowing him to. So instead then, Boa has returned to his homeland, there biding his time and plotting out his next move. Will this be a comeback tour of America, possibly in places like TNA, GCW, or MLW? Or will it see him make a play to either get in AEW or get back in WWE? Really, it could go either way, but if that's going to take a while, then the next best option for him might be to start working in his local indie scenes. After all, China, like most countries, does have an indie wrestling scene, with promotions like Oriental Wrestling Entertainment, Dragon Fighting Wrestling, and Middle Kingdom Wrestling being amongst the most notable examples of active companies over there. Hell, maybe Boa's ultimate plan is to take these places and raise them up to the next level, making China more of a player on the international wrestling scene in the process. Yes, it's entirely possible he has no need for North America at all anymore, as he sees his motherland as being his real focus going forward. Whatever happens, we've no doubt he'll continue to be a real talent wherever he goes, just as the rest of the people we've looked at today.